Hello and welcome to the Power of Deep Listening. Today, I'm excited to be here with you to share something that is very near and dear to my heart within the world of communication. Before we go deeper into talking about deep listening, I want to take a moment and introduce myself. My name is Zipporah. I'm an intimacy and mindful relating educator. And I've received the gift for nearly 2 decades of being able to travel the world, working with individuals, couples, as well as groups and organizations to help them to cultivate their emotional intelligence skills so they have the ability to go out into the world and to create healthy, successful relationships. And what we're about to talk about here today is one of the key elements I find in cultivating healthy relationships, and that is deep listening. So I'd like to invite you to think about what is communication for you? What are things that you get from communication? For some, it's a sharing of ideas. It could be a form of having connection, community, being heard, sharing what's on our mind. And I'm curious, as you think about what communication might be for you, I also invite you to think about what ways do you or have you sabotaged the quality of communication in your life? So what ways have you sabotaged the quality of communication that you could have in your life? Some of the things that might come to mind. I know the first thing that comes to me is where we get stuck in our emotional story. If I take something personally and I have an emotional trigger and an upset, and my manic mind takes over, and I start to make it about me, and I'm so inflamed and triggered that fight, flight, or freeze response starts to kick in, and I'm no longer actually communicating or even hearing what the other person is sharing because I'm too busy internally in this state of war, thinking about how I'm going to get my words in edgewise, how am I going to defend myself, how am I going to attack back, because I go into a state of war. Another way that I know to be true that we sabotage relationships is when someone else is sharing and I just want to get in. Their story's going off, and then I'm just like, oh my God, I did that, I did this. And I start wanting to compare my story to theirs. But what's worse is what happens when the belly starts to contract, the chest starts to contract, the throat starts to contract, you're no longer breathing. And you just want to get your word in. And so again, I made it about me, and I'm no longer actually in communication with this other person. Have you ever felt that? Yeah, I can so resonate with that. How about another way we sabotage relationships? When we communicate from a place of trying to fix something. We're listening to someone share maybe a grief story or a pain story. And we start to take notes, one, to remember everything they're saying, because then we want to go back and strategize and fix, because we feel that we can fix what's going on for them. So while some of these, not all of these, might have good intent, they still sabotage the quality of communication we can have. Deep listening is something that I find in this fast-paced world has been forgotten. And yet I also know that deep listening is one of the most profound gifts we can offer another human being, as well as a gift that we can receive for ourselves when someone else chooses to sit in that place of deep listening. I find it a simple art form of just being still, open, receptive to receive what this person sharing is offering. Magic happens in that place of stillness, because often we might originally go into a communication, a conversation, because we have something we want to get clarity on, to clear up with a partner or a friend, or that we're going through something challenging in our life and we need to vent it. We want to vent it with somebody. What I have found to be true is when we sit in that place of stillness, openness, and present, just to listen, the person sharing eventually goes through so many layers within their emotional body, psychological body, physiologically, that the answer to what they might have been seeking comes through them on their own without us ever having to step in and interfere. A couple of things regarding the process of deep listening and how it's formally done. Often what we start to share doesn't necessarily logically make sense. You know, my partner and I share in this experience at least once a week. And when he is just there listening and present, and it's my turn to share, I can have like 100 ideas and thoughts and transmissions, I call them, come through me within a 3-minute share. And sometimes his eyes are just popping out, wondering, how did that just happen? And how am I going to hold on to all that information? Well, you know what happens within that 100 ideas and transmissions coming through me? Is that I don't need him to hold on to anything that I shared. I don't want him to hold on to anything that I just shared. Because me sharing that level of depth and vulnerability, and my allowing that information to just come through me the way it came through me, that was part of my deep soul process. Sharing simply for me to share. So that's an important note to make, is when we go through the process of deep listening. While the listener and the person sharing and speaking will both have their individual journeys, what the person is sharing truly has nothing to do with the person listening. And what the person listening starts to feel, whether they start to feel agitated, nervous, a lack of presence, or present and calm, or they start to have thoughts, that's their process and has nothing to do with the person speaking or sharing. I'm going to share with you a couple ways that you can apply these practices at home. You can apply these practices with your loved ones, with your partner. You can even do this in a work environment. First and foremost is you're going to create an agreed structure. And it's called a dyad. Dyad meaning two. Within that agreed structure, there will be a time frame set for the person to share and the other to listen. There will be a time frame to switch and have the listener share and the sharer, the speaker, listen. While each person is sharing and listening, what you want to avoid is you want to avoid any form of acknowledgement. And you're thinking, God, aren't I communicating with this person? Don't I want to acknowledge and offer them empathy and compassion? Those are very powerful tools. And this process is something different. This process is allowing an individual to find their own way. And in that process, they are opening up in the most vulnerable way, with you as the witness. So what I mean by acknowledgement, we all do it, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. We want to avoid nodding, smiling, squeezing of the eyebrow, making any form of facial gestures. We want to resist hand gestures, leaning in, touching, speaking, laughing. Now, while I say we want to avoid these things, if you find yourself doing those, it's okay. This is the time that self-compassion comes in. Remind yourself and step back into presence. Because we're all perfectly human. And for you, this might be the very first time that you've explored anything like this. What a dyad in deep listening looks like, I suggest having a timer. Timer, maybe set it for 30 minutes. And have intervals set for 3 minutes. So every 3 minutes, a chime will go off. I often start with a very generic inquiry. And that means you will each choose who's going to speak first and who's going to listen first. You sit across from each other, closely enough to hear, but not touching each other. Open body language, arms open, is always a great thing. It's welcoming, it's inviting. To begin the process, you say, "Tell me something you want me to know." The bell goes off, the chime goes off, and you simply find that place of stillness, openness, and just receive. The person sharing and speaking will speak until the chime goes off. If at any time you feel there's nothing coming through you. You might feel emotions. You might feel nervousness, uncomfortability. In those moments, I invite you to just breathe. Keep eye connection, but continue to breathe. My first dyad experience in deep listening was 19 years ago. And it was in the Swiss Alps. And I was paired up with this gorgeous Italian man. And as soon as we sat across from each other, the room got silent and the chime went off. This beautiful man, gazing deep into my eyes, says, "Tell me something you want me to know." And when I heard those words and I saw the depth that he was looking at me, I froze. My heart started racing. My palms started sweating. Panic started to set in, and I couldn't find words. What I realized is how much I needed at that time in my life acknowledgement of what I was saying was okay, of what I was saying was approved by the person listening. And because in this process, this experience, he wasn't going to be giving me approval by nodding the head or affirming what I was saying was a good thing to be saying. So I felt a fear of being judged. I felt this level of insecurity in me. But what happened that was magical in that share was the entire time him and I had locked our eyes looking at each other, breathing deep diaphragmatic breaths with each other. So the presence was always there. And so I invite you to do the same if that comes up for you. The other thing that I invite into this experience, if you're doing it at home, is to potentially have your back supported, whether that's a chair, whether that's a back jack, that's a seat on the floor. And when you start your share, I would even add another segment in prior to speaking, and that's breathing. And that might sound, what do you mean? I breathe all the time. But what I'm talking about here is a form of conscious, connected breath work. And what it looks like, or what it sounds like, is going to breathe in and out through the mouth. You can imagine a wave that's rising and crashing onto the beach, or you can imagine a circle. It's in and out through your mouth, and it's going into the lowest part of your belly below your navel center. So you can place your two hands on your lower belly, open your jaw gently, and so there's ease in it. It's not forced. Don't try to force yourself to pull in breath. But just open your mouth, swallow when you need to swallow. It might feel odd to breathe through the mouth. You might never do it. But breathe for about 3 minutes. You can alternate with eyes closed to get connected to you and your body. You can breathe with your eyes open to connect with your partner. What that breathwork does is it grounds us. It brings us in our body. Helps us feel more present. It will calm the nervous system. And throughout the cycles over that 30 minutes, if you added more cycles and did breath between every share, it also takes you deeper into the emotional and psychological bodies. So that creates and allows you to access what I call soul communication. a deeper level to what you're going to share. A couple of agreements when you're doing dyads at home and deep listening is there is an agreement to use life-affirming language. And what that means is when you're speaking, you're sharing from the I perspective. You're not blaming or pointing the finger at someone else. You are speaking, I felt this, I needed that, I noticed that, rather than making it about the other person. Another agreement within this form of communication process is as if you're communicating something extremely raw, vulnerable, sometimes what I would call a withhold, something that might be intensely emotionally triggering for the person listening. The agreement is that you do not talk about, go deeper into process about this topic for a minimal of 48 hours. 48 hours I find is a really good time frame to do the solo work, to get in a clear state, to calm that fight, flight, or freeze response, and to be able to go back into conversation with an open heart and from a loving space of really, really wanting to hear and understand the other person. But the agreement is not to re-enter into those conversations about any of the topics until you know that you are able to do that. And you're simply honoring that agreement out of wanting to honor each other and the relationship. Again, this could be personally, but it can also be professionally. So I invite you to explore deep listening in your life. I invite you to take 30-minute practices, maybe once, maybe twice a week. Maybe go home and practice with a friend, practice with your partner, or practice with your parents. Offer it up like it's a new game, that it's something fun rather than something odd, because your partner, or even in the work environment, deep listening, they might think it's kind of woo-woo. But if you say, I want to communicate with you in a way that I really hear you. This form of communication exercise helps me to be more present in my body. It helps me to understand more of my feelings and my needs. And I want to be able to share more honestly and openly with you from that place. And when I'm in that place, it also allows me to hear you more and to understand more of your feelings and needs. You want to give this a try? So, explaining why you want to communicate in this way. What might they get out of it? How might it add to your relationship? So I thank you for joining me today for this topic on the power of deep listening. And I look forward to hearing about your practices at home, challenges, insights, because you might learn more ways of how you sabotage your communication and start to exercise the deep listening muscle, and the quality of your relationships will start to change. You might also notice that hesitation to be seen, feeling unworthy, scared to speak, and the things that you were needing that were also sabotaging your relationships, that were disempowering you and your relationships. So pay attention, have fun, and let me know how it goes.